showing up today for our second book sandwich in of the season. I'm Dina Viviani, here to start with just a few housekeeping announcements. First, for safety purposes, if there is a need to evacuate the building, the door on my right, your left, is our closest exit. For anyone using a hearing aid, please take advantage of our induction loop system. It amplifies all sound coming through the microphone. And along those lines, if we have time for Q&A at the end, please wait until this microphone is with you so that everyone can hear and participate. Please silence or turn off your cell phones now so as not to disrupt the speaker. And we'd like to thank the Friends of Brighton Memorial Library for sponsoring this program and the whole series. They just had a great book sale this October. We are taking donations again for the next book sale in February. The bookstore is open in the rear of the building. And along those lines, we also have some books here that are titles for some upcoming books sandwiched in. Everything else is checked out right now. So if you do want a title of Horse or Catch the Sparrow for next month, please stop by the information desk and they can place a hold for you. Holds are free, place as many holds as you'd like so that you've got all your titles for our season. And also along those lines, if anyone had received one of our first BSI flyers, there has been a change for January. January 4th is now, it's not the John Boyne novel any longer. Instead, we are doing A Fever in the Heartland by Timothy Egan, presented by James Spiller, who's a history professor at SUNY Brockport. So if you'd like an updated flyer with that change for January, please grab one at the table on your way out. And we also have our November program brochure is out. We've got some more bookish type programs coming up. We've got some craft type programs coming up, and we have our Sunday serenades coming up. So please do grab one of these programs so you can see what else the Friends have sponsored for us. And now, I don't have an official bio for Athene Goldstein, but I'm just going to wing it and say she's been here before. She's done many book reviews for us. She just did one on Catterskill Falls for us for an upcoming author visit. We'll be at the Jewish Book Festival. She is an educator. She teaches all ages. She has taught children and adults. She is a very avid reader, and we're very happy to have her today to review Horse. Thank you, Athene.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me back, even after I gave such a unhappy review of Cloud Cuckoo. And we had a wonderful time, but it was not a book I enjoyed. But that's okay. I'm going to start by doing a little biography of Geraldine Brooks. I will start by saying, if at some point I call her Gwendolyn, just roll your eyes. It's a long story, I'll tell you at the end. Sometimes I forget and call her Gwendolyn. It's Geraldine. Ms. Brooks was born September 14th, 1955 in Sydney, Australia. She grew up in a family of writers and artists, which influenced her interest in storytelling. Before becoming a novelist, she had a successful career in journalism. She worked for the Sydney Morning Herald and also the Wall Street Journal. Then she went into the most complicated and conflict areas in the world. She reported from places such as the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. Her experience as a war correspondent provided her with valuable insights that would later influence her fiction writing. And then she transferred to fiction, and in 2006, her book, March, won the Pulitzer Prize. Those of you who know the book, and by the way, I think that is her best in her oeuvre. It's a reimagining of the father from Louisa May Alcott's classic Little Women, and talks about the father who served as a chaplain during the American Civil War. But it starts with and Bronson was an itinerant, Bronson is Louisa May Alcott's father. Bronson was an itinerant salesman in the South, and that does figure in her books. She was married to author Tony Hurwitz, who was a prize-winning author and journalist. He died in 2019. They had one son, Nathaniel, and they adopted a son from Ethiopia. And that is important for race, isn't it? Yes. Because, of course, when there was the George Floyd I don't know whether I should use the word incident or events, she felt that she had to respond. And she has been open about the fact that this book, Horse, is a response to those events. Because, of course, Bisou, that's the name of their son, is black. And we might want to talk at some point about whether it matters that she had an agenda and whether that colors the way the book is written, whether there is she's got a motive for writing, not just she wants to present a story. So we could talk about that. I'm fascinated by the fact that so many modern books, well, I use the word modern in the last 4 or 5 years, the literary trope, pardon me for using that term, the literary device seems to be books either in different times, last year's Cloud Cuckoo Land being a perfect example, or with different voices. And I commend to your attention the book Trust by Hernan Diaz, which is told from the vantage point of 4 different voices. And that's an excellent book. I don't think it's on your list for this year, but do consider it for next year. Fabulous. And of course, Miss Brooks is writing this book in 3 different time periods, isn't she? 1850s, Martha Jackson in the 1950s, and of course 2019. I would like to discuss how I think that plays out first. But I want to read something because I think the most important aspect of this book, of course, is the idea of slavery, race. And of course, horse can be seen as race in 2 ways. The black jockeys and trainers, and of course, the horse racing itself. And we'll get to that. Most of you are familiar. It's one of the iconic pictures of George Washington. It's George Washington and Martha. She's got her fan on the map, and they have their 2 grandchildren standing on either side of them. And that's an iconic image, which I'm sure you know, but I'd like to read something. The shadowy figure of the enslaved man in the background of the painting disappeared from several versions of the image in the antebellum era. Americans preferred not to see the first president as an enslaver. Bond's people had not disappeared from the Curtis's lives, however. Most of the enslaved at Mount Vernon had been owned by the Custis family. Not George Washington himself. They remained in bondage to the Custises. Martha Washington had been a Custis. That was her first husband. In bondage to the Custises after Martha and George died. All 4 grandchildren lived with and depended upon enslaved people and their children who had come from Mount Vernon. Although few records of these bondspeople survive. The Custises also had black relatives born into slavery through sexual violation of enslaved women. The latest research points to the probability that their father, Jackie, had a son, William Costin, with an enslaved woman, and Wash Custis, the young boy in this picture, had numerous children with enslaved women as well. When Costin and several of Wash's mixed-race children gained their freedom, the Custises excluded them from the siblings' quest to remain known as George Washington's family. They were truly erased. I'd like you to think, so it's not just Geraldine Brooks talking about what happens to Jared in Lexington or New Orleans. It's the whole trajectory of our American history from the 1619, 1620, when the first boatloads arrived, until quite recently. Everybody that I've talked to about this book has one complaint, and that is the paintings. Everybody gets confused as to there are 3 paintings, correct? There are 3. And everybody gets a little confused as to where they are, where they end up. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about that, and then I will talk about my feelings about the book. The first painting, of course, is done by Mr. Scott and given to Jared. It's just like a sketch, and that's, you know, when the cold is quite young. And that's the one that Jared keeps and is stolen from him by the Quantrells. Remember, the raiders that come in and seize that painting. That painting ends up, you'll pardon me for saying, in the house of some, pardon me, poor white trash, because that's what they probably were, and is the one that ends up on the curb in Washington in 2019. And that is picked up by Theo. We'll hold that thought. The second one and the third are intertwined, allow me. Jared had helped the painter, as always, keeping the blind horse calm in his unfamiliar high-walled turnout. Scott's first effort had captured the horse superbly, but he was unsatisfied with the background. Knowing that Alexander was used to Troy's rich finishes, he decided to try a second time. He presented this work, second work, to Mr. Alexander. The other he gave to Jared. Quote, "If Lexington is a success as stud as he was on the track, you'll find a buyer for it someday. Think of it as a payment for all the help you've given me these years." So there are 2 paintings at that point. Jared has 2 of them. Mr. Alexander has 1. So the first painting is stolen or taken by the Quantrell Raiders. The second one Jared gives to May, the woman with whom he lives, before she leaves with her husband and child to go out west. It's that painting that ends up in Annie's possession, Martha Jackson's housekeeper, and that's the painting that Martha Jackson buys and presents to the Smithsonian. The third painting that is given to Mr. Alexander is sold at some point to the Turf and Stream, the magazine, and that painting is bought by Jared when he becomes successful and ends up in Canada. Eventually, Theo, when he's trying to do research, says there are 2, they know of the 2 paintings, but they can't find one. That's because it's in Canada and there's no record. I was fascinated, first of all, let's talk about the more modern part of the book. I found the 2019 sections rather disappointing. I thought both characters were stereotypical, one-dimensional. Theo, handsome, educated, kind, a runner, a cook, perfect. But no nuance, not much development there. And then there's Jess, an Australian naif, with an F, not a V, who has no concept of race or not much. She's not developed at all. And I think Brooks fails in this because I know what she's trying to do. She's placing these people to show what can happen, and what did happen, of course, to George Floyd, so that she's trying to say that black men are vulnerable, even people who are educated and well and very prosperous. So I found that part of the book, every time I got to one of those sections, I sort of was gritting my teeth, because I think you're not developing these people. They're not flesh. As far as Martha Jackson, she's put in there deus ex machina. She's there just to show us how that painting is going to get to the Smithsonian. And the several pages that Geraldine Brooks devotes to Lee Kushner, the painter married, of course, to Jackson Pollock, are gratuitous. There is no need for her to, to bring that in. But she's using those two parts of the book to show us what's happening to the paintings. Very nice. She maybe could have just left the paintings out, I thought. Let's talk about the main part of the book. Race in two senses. We have Jared. And if you look at the book, and I thought this was fabulous, every time she has a heading that involves Jared, it is either Ten Brooks Jarrett, Warfield's Jarrett, or Alexander's Jarrett. Jared is commodity, isn't he? He's enslaved. He is commodity. And I think that is very cleverly done. I think she really does very well with that. So you have these black trainers and you have the black jockeys, and they are creating, well, they're not creating, they are the workforce that creates this industry, the racing industry in the South. Very successful. I didn't realize that the horse racing was that old. I thought it was after the Civil War. I would like us to consider let's take this up to modern day, and let us think about sports industries, very, very successful, that depend on a particular population. I'm listening. What? Football, thank you. Think about football. I mean, somebody once said, well, what about soccer? Maybe more white players in soccer, but in football, predominantly black, not all, but many black players who are making a tremendous amount of money, but are being used, if you will, to create, and on the college campuses for sure, to create this industry that is creating tremendous wealth for a small number of people. I would like us to consider whether location matters. Does it matter that Jared is in Kentucky first and then New Orleans? Did you think about that?
Well, he never would have.
Pardon?
He never would have been given the rights to own the horse. It was a Kentucky owner who had different ideas about slavery than
Yes, and but he eventually didn't get to own the horse.
No, but it was that owner who
Yeah, Warfield, yes. Think about Kentucky.
Borders.
Pardon?
Borders.
Border state. There are four. I don't think. I think Kentucky is one of the states that, like with Maryland, Missouri. I think Kentucky is one of the border states. So that makes it where you are, where you grow, where you are. Matters tremendously. It matters, but quite frankly, it matters for all of us where we are. I mean, if I, I grew up in Baltimore. If I had grown up in Louisiana, I probably we'd be different people because we would have different experience. So the opportunity is there in a border state that would not be there if he had been in a state like Mississippi or Alabama.
New Orleans is such a mixed area.
Ah, wonderful, thank you. I wanted to do that next.
Populations.
And then you get to New Orleans, where you have everything. You have white, black, and everything in between, and other cultures as well. And how does that affect the book? to do this together. And this is not just moi. Okay? How does it affect? Whoopsie. Okay. How does the fact that he is sold down the river, as it were, but ends up in New Orleans, how does that affect Jared's trajectory?
Isn't that also where
Yes.
he learns? Isn't
What?
that also where he learns to read?
Maybe we can we use the microphone? I think we really need to have people, I want people to be able to hear each other.
I was just going to say, isn't that where he learns to read? That minister helps him learn to read, so he can start to be more educated and kind of learn about how he can eventually free himself. Because he also wasn't, I read it a while ago, a long time ago, but wasn't he friendly with a black man there that I guess cut hair or did something or got him clothes? So there was a number of characters that showed him what he could be.
You have a character who is obviously homosexual and successful. You have people who are willing to, well, he learns to read from somebody on a plantation, but he is allowed certain freedoms in New Orleans because New Orleans is cosmopolitan and diverse in a way that Lexington is not. Because Lexington, of course, is, if you will, enslaved and plantation. And that makes a tremendous amount of difference. So he has opportunities in New Orleans to improve, or to learn to read, and to learn to write. And this is going to be critical. However, he is not freed. When Ten Broek decides to go to England, he says, I was thinking of taking you, but you lied to me about the fact that Lexington was going blind, and I'm selling you. And he does. And he sells him to Mr. Alexander. But Mr. Alexander comes from a different background. Mr. Alexander he's Scottish, from a Scottish background. So he's coming, what is Geraldine Brooks saying about the outside world, about the slave world? Why does she put Mr. Alexander in there, who, by the way, sends Jared across the river with the horses, remember? Because they're moving them out right before the Civil War starts, they start moving the horses out because they know what's going to happen. So the horses get sent across to Ohio. Remember, we talk about location. We talk about New Orleans, which is going to be diverse. We can talk about Kentucky, if you will, the other way, because across the river is, you all know this from Uncle Tom's Cabin. What's across the river? What state? Ohio. Now, of course, we have a problem now with Ohio. It's gotten a little red. But in those, think about this. In those days, you have Harriet Beecher Stowe in the 1850s in Cincinnati. You have a very strong abolitionist movement in Ohio. So you have opportunities, Geraldine Brooks is telling us, location, location, location. There are going to be opportunities depending on where you are. And Jared has opportunities because, fortunately, he's back north in the south, but in an area where he can experience a degree of freedom. Let's talk about the horse. Well, that's the name of the book, Horse. What do you want to say about it?
I thought it was fascinating that his skeleton had been at the Smithsonian for decades and lost its connection to the reason that it got there and the fact that he had been so famous.
What is Brooks saying? What is she saying about? I was thinking about something else, but that's fabulous. The skeleton is there, Jess is there. She's supposed to, they're putting it together, right? Well, it was put together wrong, and she's doing, they're correcting things. What does that say about memory? About fame? Here was this stud that was incredible. All these winning horses, and now his skeleton is long, it has no fame. So we need to think about the evanescence, if we will, of fame, that it comes and it goes, and then nobody remembers us. But let's think about, she could have named the book Lexington. She didn't. Why does she name the book Horse?
Generalized.
What?
It's more generalized.
It's more generalized, and I think it takes what?
Universal.
Universal, and it takes away the relation. And I think what's really critical is the relationship between Jared and the horse is not if you call the horse Lexington, then it's Jared. There's a connection with Jared, right? You call it, it's not the same thing if you said horse. However, remember that Jared and his father named the horse. It has a different name. And the owners changed it to Lexington because they wanted to evoke the place where the horse is raised. And also make it, and by naming the horse, Warfield and his contemporaries, or his group, take ownership. I think that's critical. The horse does not belong to Jared or to his father. It doesn't belong to him legally, and it doesn't belong to him in any sense because he is not able to name the animal. The name is given by the Warfields, who own not only the animal, but Jared. I want you to think of, can we expand that a moment? In the South, the owners in the plantation named the slaves, for the most part. You had some pretty fancy names. You had Calpurnia, you had Octavian. They gave the slaves, for many parts, Greco-Roman names of people from either Greek myths or Caesar or Augustus. What were they saying, those owners?
I control you.
Thank you. I control you. I give you your name. I'll just end with one thing. I know all of us that have children have had those have had those little conversations when it comes time to name children or grandchildren, and it becomes fraught, doesn't it? Fraught, because one parent wants them to be named for this grandparent, and it becomes very difficult, right? Because in a sense, what you're saying is, this is part ownership. And I think at the end of the book, at the end of the day, what Geraldine Brooks is saying is this system was corrupt because you have a class of people that has ownership over another class of people that has very little options and no rights, which I think, of course, is of course, central. And if I can just say, you all know the story in the Bible about Moses. His mother puts it, she has him for 3 months, and then she puts him in the basket, and he is on the Nile, and the Pharaoh's daughter takes him out of the Nile. She names him Moses, which means son of, by the way, like Tutmos Ramses Moses. I took him from the water. She is taking ownership, and I think that's critical. Oh, okay, we're done.
I think naming the horse, naming the book horse, makes the horse a universal symbol.
Okay,
for the system.
Okay.
But if they use the name of the horse, it becomes more about that particular horse. And I think it loses its generality.
Okay. It becomes general. Yes, this is generalized. Yes. It's not just Lexington.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
I like the name horse because I think the book is about training and nurturing of horses and what they need.
Interesting.
I think horse is a metaphor, and it enabled Brooks to expand on all the ways that people were living at that period of time. And horse was just a vehicle, personally.
Okay.
So, I think it's a long book. It had lots and lots of details. Every once in a while, I think there was a little part of it that we talked about how they made drinks, and how the character Theo made a drink, and how we learned how to do it. And if it's a metaphor, isn't it just around for liberty or freedom or even the strength of that horse that goes from generation to generation, or whatever metaphor you want? It seems to me a pretty messy or burdensome metaphor. It's not, would it have been better to write an essay? Is it more, because you have so many details about the care of the horses and how he raised them so kindly, and all the different parts about that. You get, you're going that direction, and then you're going to switch to another direction. I don't know. Was it effective? That's what I want to say. Was it effective?
Okay. And remember I said before she had an agenda, so that ties in with this. Is the book effective? The way she wrote it, was it effective? Did you come out feeling, did you understand what she was trying to do? Yes.
I think it was very effective. I wouldn't have picked the book up to read it because I didn't know what it was really about and how well she covered the subject.
Mm-hmm.
My ancestry was, I do know now, that great-grandfather did own a slave, but we're doing business in Savannah, Georgia for several months or years, and he picked up slaves, and he brought some back to Massachusetts with him. And eventually he was part of the group that tried to make sure that Nebraska was not a slave state. He sent money there to outfit people who were against slavery in Nebraska. This was just before the Civil War. And, he paid for guns and other things, and there was a big shootout, and Nebraska eventually went into the Union as a non-slave holding state. Now, do I criticize him for having slaves when he was living in an area that everybody had slaves, because you couldn't run a big farm or plantation without slaves to do the labor? And, you know, smaller holdings just economically wouldn't make it. England was also a big slave, and my history said that most of the slaves came on English ships to America originally, till they banned it finally, and America continued with slavery. There's something in my literature in the family about how much he paid, or maybe it was in the book there, how much they paid for a slave. That's an unreasonable amount for, you know, the horses were selling for $30, $40, which was a hell of a lot of money when you were earning cents for each hour you worked, pennies. Even in, well, I'm getting into this too much, even years ago, when people worked at Kodak, their early salary, I'm told by people who were starting there in the early 40s, was like $7 an hour. And you have to put that in perspective when they say they bought a slave or a slave family for $1,000. That was a huge investment. And then they tried to take care of them. They're not going to mistreat many of these slaves that are so important to them. And I think that part of history we've been wiping out. Yes, the lynchings since then, all the bad things that happened to black people that happened since then, because we can't give up our old prejudices. But the slave owners themselves were not all brutes, and many, as you said, were like George Washington and other people that had to have a place that his wife and family could earn a living and take care of it. Women were, you know, left on their own. Their husbands were at war, these kinds of things. And there was no welfare payments then. So you either worked or you didn't eat. So the name horse made me pick up that book, because I thought it did have more about horses and horse racing. And I'm very impressed with your analysis of what their agenda was. And I'm glad I read it, but it's been quite a long time now, and I will have to reread it to bring back some of these tie-ins.
Do you think, may I ask a question, do you think this would make a good motion picture, a movie?
I'm not sure it would, because movies are overplayed. They put a lot of violence in them, a lot of modern words like fuck you all over the place. They get young people to pick them up and
I could see, you know, I could see this as a film. Go, that's it. Go ahead.
Who's next? Anyone next? I was thinking about what someone early on said about how when the horse was being put back together in the modern chapters, how you kind of forgot, nobody knew who it was and all of that. That the title was representative of that too. Like, it's just a horse, right? It's just a horse, but has all of this history. But I also thought it was interesting, you know, whether or not it was a purposeful choice by the author, how when they started leading up to the eye injury in the modern chapters, how I immediately was like, oh my God, who beat this horse, right? I jumped right to someone was mistreating the horse. And I was like, oh my God, like horrified, but you still have to remember to be just as horrified or more horrified by how the people were treated, all of the slaves, and it was just interesting. Then the relief I felt later, right? You didn't want the horse to have gotten sick either, but the relief you felt, but I think part of it is because you're manipulated through the main character, why am I forgetting, the slave Jared, you're looking through his point of view when he loves this horse, but also like you don't want to forget as you're reading, like you should be just as scared and horrified by how the people are treated, not just the animals. So I thought it was a good technique she used there.
You remember Miss Clay, the young girl who keeps going down to Jared's quarters to talk to him? That is probably so ahistorical, probably never happened. I don't know why she puts that in with, the granddaughter going down to in her little satin slippers, because that wasn't going to happen in the plantation. She wouldn't be going down to fraternize with the horse trainer. And I really couldn't figure out why she kept putting that in, unless she was trying to say, oh, all the slave owners are not bad. Some of them have real feelings for the slaves. But of course, you could say if she were discovered, Jared would be killed immediately, because it would of course be assumed that he's taking advantage of her. I thought that was pretty interesting when she has that character in there who seems to be overstepping the bounds, if you will, of what was probably acceptable at that time.
If you read Douglas's autobiography, you will find there were times when he was friends with some of the slaveholders' family, and he was taught to read by his owner's family, and that was against the law to teach anybody to read. So there were different situations.
Yes.
And especially the isolation of a plantation. You don't have friends up the block
True.
to play with.
That's
so.
true. Yeah. But the situation is fraught, quite frankly.
I was wondering if the chapter with the young woman going to visit Jarrett was supposed to be some kind of like parallel with the later chapters with the woman dating the man at the end. I don't know if they were trying to show some kind of like white woman, black man relationship, something. Because I didn't fully, I know you mentioned it earlier, and I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts, but in the 2019 chapters about the relationship, the romantic relationship part, which I know we talked before, like, was it necessary for the book? Was it just there to bring things home even more?
I see it. I think that she put that in because she wants, I thought, with her agenda of bringing the vulnerability of black men to the consciousness of America. She needs to talk about 2019, not just 1855.
I thought the granddaughter was something of a rebel, and that the author was showing that young people sometimes break with tradition and see things differently, and that she saw him as a person as opposed to just a slave.
That's true, but she was putting him at tremendous risk. It was very nice for her to be a rebel, but she would get away with whatever she did.
But she wasn't considering the consequences.
She's not, well, that's very nice, but, I agree. It's not, she wasn't considering the consequences, but they could have been very severe for Jared.
But I think she's showing that some people in the book saw Jared as an individual and not just a commodity.
I think she did it because she was acting out against her family. I don't think she had any consideration for what it might mean to him, but it was her way of acting out.
Acting out and showing that, yeah.
By the way, I found, I had to keep stopping myself from thinking about this as all in the past. We are still a slave country. We support slavery all over the world every time we buy something out of China or out of the Middle East or wherever, because we are supporting the slavery that's going on right now today.
Absolutely.
Someone else? Anyone else? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
the issue of place. I grew up in Newport, Kentucky, right across from Cincinnati. So, and I was very proud of the fact that we had an underground railroad station in our town. And as a young adult, I moved to Lexington, and somebody said to me, when we lost the war, and I'm thinking, wait, we never lost any wars. And I thought, oh yeah, Alice, 90 miles makes a difference.
Yeah, 90 miles, yes. And there, so its location, yes, location is critical. Thank you.
Anything else? If anyone wants a copy of the book to read, if you haven't, please stop by the information desk and place one on hold. I think even after hearing some of the spoilers, I think you'll get a lot out of it after Athene's presentation. Thank you, Athene.
It was my pleasure.